Hi, Dr. Kimberly Camrass. It's great to be with you, and I really do appreciate you joining us from wherever you are. I didn't actually ask where you are. It's obviously an office. Is it in Brisbane? Are you in your Brisbane office?
I'm actually for once in Brisbane, at
Okay,
home
cool.
in Brisbane.
Okay, so you're a highly mobile futurist, and I would say sustainability advocate. Kind of combine them both. Categories. Well, what are they anyway? Now, I'm really interested if you could start us off without me giving you your CV. Rather, you tell us what happened from your PhD, end of your PhD, when you were working with Brisbane City Council or the state government or something. Can you tell us from there to how you landed in Boeing and what is it that you're doing now?
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Marcus Bussey. Um, I was previously working when I was finishing up my PhD for the state government, actually, and we're doing a lot of the early planning from a climate and sustainability perspective for the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And that was great, and obviously brings in some futures thinking and planning heavily when you're planning that from that event. But after I finished my PhD, I really felt like I wanted another challenge. And one of my faults or perhaps good qualities is that I always want to be challenged. And I sort of serendipitously heard about a role at Boeing working in sustainability to decarbonise aviation and working across Australia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific Islands. So my role here is really unique and really varied, I find, which is why it's fun, because it's focusing on working to influence policy that helps aviation become decarbonised and more sustainable, which is pretty tricky. It's also partnering with academic institutions, with the CSIRO, but also with the airlines and with others who are making innovative fuel out of household waste. So really broad partnerships, and then getting to do some research and technical work around climate models for aviation decarbonisation, hydrogen electric flights. So I like to think it's got a good balance of looking to the future, but also working on things that we can influence now.
This is beautiful. Okay, so thank you for that. So that's as good a CV as I think anybody needs to have, and certainly everybody should be impressed. I'm impressed. Sounds much better than saying, "Oh, I'm a lecturer at a university," which sounds pretty boring for most people, I think. So let's cut to the chase. How did you get into futures? What happened that brought you into this field?
I'd like to say I had this really strategic focus and knowledge that futures is where I wanted to go. But to be honest, like most good things that have happened in my life, I fell into futures in a formal sense, kind of by accident, really. I'd been a school teacher many years ago, and then I'd got into sustainability, and been always really interested in the social aspect of sustainability. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a brilliant engineer. I'm interested in how we can bring people at individual levels or societal levels together to make positive change for sustainability and for the climate. Anyway, long story short, I was looking to do a PhD, and I really wanted to delve into something really chunky and meaningful, and I knew that I wanted to look at regenerative design and regenerative precincts, and that really just means looking at how we design spaces in a way that doesn't just limit the harm we're causing to the environment or to society, but that can actually help to regenerate damage that we've already caused. And I could see that, how we design spaces, how we build things, of course, is really important. But to me, there was this sort of underlying layer of, how do we engage people in shaping their futures in that way, particularly that live in cities. I did a lot of reading and I did a lot of looking for experts, and I came across your work, Marcus. And it's the kind of light bulb went off for me that this thing called futures, this field that felt at home to me, although I had never formally really dived into, was maybe the missing link for the work I wanted to do and the thinking I wanted to do. So quite frankly, I read a lot of your work and the work of others, and I remember getting in touch with you, and we had a coffee, and from there it began. But
Yes.
I think like all good things, starting with a coffee, but I think anyone who's coming to the point of maybe wanting to look into futures or to do a PhD in this space, it's probably going to be someone that maybe has always been a bit curious and fascinated by human behaviour, fascinated by the future, but I think always also by history, by that kind of, you know, macro consideration of time. So I accidentally dived in, but I think what Futures has given me since that time is some structure or a framework is probably a better word, to do that thinking and to different models and things to use to really think differently about the future, but to communicate that as well.
Nice, nice. I think you already answered my second question, which is why you're still in it. So, so maybe we could take a lead from what you just said. So, in your current role with Boeing, do you use your own model for regenerative futures, or are you using other tools? Can you give us one example, maybe, of a futures method that's kind of helping you in your current work?
There's a few, but one, the first answer is yes. So in a really simple way, my work is looking at how do you achieve a net zero aviation sector by 2050, and then you need to obviously map back from there. So a range of different approaches to foresight and things that obviously are used as things like analysing different scenarios, but also working out how to communicate those with the partners that need to be part of this. Yeah. Obviously backcasting from the future, but again, a lot of those things are technical in nature and really important. What I'm finding the barriers are around is how do you communicate those to different people and to different entities, even to governments. Yeah. And sometimes, you know, we can do this without actually referring to a specific futures tool or model, but utilising it almost by stealth, yeah, as we sometimes talk about. So I often use causal aid analysis, even if I don't say I'm using it. Yeah. Because and for those of you who are just getting into futures, as you may or may not know, you know, causal aid analysis helps us to look at a situation, a possible future, us, at different layers, the obvious, the litany, the systems that underpin it, the worldviews, and then the narrative or metaphor. And those things are all interrelated. For me, that's a fascinating tool to use, particularly when you're trying to influence policy, because I think we often stop at the top. And being able to work up and down those levels is really important. So futures thinking for me, it's almost becomes kind of inherent, particularly if you're in a role where you're trying to influence for and advocate for positive change. So a very long-winded answer, but I think I use it in lots of different ways, Marcus. And the thing that makes me excited about it is that you never know futures. I don't think I'll ever know futures. And it's this continual experimentation, trial and error, utilising it in different situations. And then you gather all these cool data points around how people react to it.
Love it. And, you know, you don't know, we don't know, none of us know. So there's something else involved in that kind of thinking. I think the futures by stealth works really, really well. And I use a stealth CLA as well, and I've used it many times. And also there's something about the power of not knowing that feeds what you spoke about earlier, which is the curiosity.
Yes.
And the other thing is that it's aspirational. Boeing wants to be carbon neutral by 2050. The realities are on the ground really tough, I think. And the other thing that you mentioned, and so you've already answered the third question, which is what are the obstacles? Because the obstacles are communicating to people whose worldview, their whole experience as engineers or whatever it might be, has been very much pragmatically problem solving in the present.
Yes, exactly.
Can you speak a bit more to that?
I can, and you know, it's interesting you say that, because I think that happens at that broader scale, but for some of us, and for me, one of the things I really struggled with when I first started futures more formally in the form of the PhD is there's no right answer. There's no right answer. And I know that sounds really simple, but for me, like in my previous study, in my logical brain, the way I've, you know, it's like, well, what's the right way to write this PhD, Marcus? Or, you know, what's the right approach to take? And there is no one right answer, of course. And that's the beauty of futures, but also the challenge, because if you've gone through, you know, a fairly traditional academic or schooling or educative, you know, journey in your past, then for some of us, for me, that was a real challenge. once I work through that, then it's opened up all these different possibilities and new ways of thinking. But that can be really challenging at first, particularly if you're in the early stages of a PhD and you've not done a lot of futures work in a formal sense before. The communication, I think, is obviously, like any behavioural change process, sometimes a tough part of it as well. And I think, and again, this might sound extremely obvious, but I still think sometimes when we talk about futures or foresight to people, they think that we're trying to predict the future rather than actually looking at what the different possible futures could be and then, you know, assessing which are preferred and desirable for a particular place or an organisation. So I think that kind of paradigm shift, getting people to see it's not about getting the most accurate prediction, but about considering what the different scenarios for the future could be, and then making different decisions based on that, which is the real, you know, diamond, I guess, of this type of work. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, for me, foresight is bridge building. So that, which is what you're, in a sense, what you're saying. I like to work with metaphors, as you know. So to me, how do we help people? They have to construct their own bridges. You know, we can't be the prophet on the hill saying, "This is the way to go, guys. Follow me." No, we have to actually be very humble. Futurists, I think, need a good dose of humility, and the ones that do best are the ones that actually draw people in, listen, patiently nurture. And you know, it's the thing about your kind of job, and mine too, actually, is that it's a permanent sort of job, in the sense that you're not coming in as a consultant waving some magic wand and then disappearing saying thank you very much for the check and I'm out of here. We're here for a longer run, and I think one of the things for me that's really important to futures is that longer run, that we're in it, we ourselves have skin in the game.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think working in sustainability, you know, whether in this role or in any other role, that is my skin in the game. You know, and the ultimate is this, you know, I want to do small things that can hopefully add up into this jigsaw of making, you know, the world a more sustainable place. And so that, I think, makes, you know, people in sustainability, you know, are inherently futures focused, or should be. I think that I completely agree with the bridge building metaphor as well, Marcus. And the other thing too is I think sometimes, you know, we can take for granted that people have already thought about what the images of the future, or communities, or, you know, organisations even, about what the preferred image of the future is. And in fact, that hasn't always occurred. Sometimes it's almost like this default that we're walking into it and, you know, and inherited a used future. So I think it's, you know, this idea that, you know, we can lovingly, collaboratively, in a guided way, take people through a journey to actually even envision what that could be is pretty cool as well. And it's not, I think the other thing too, that, you know, it's not this airy-fairy, you know, thumb twiddling exercise. Like this is applied in really pragmatic settings for governments, for organisations, for communities, and that's what I think that is quite unique about futures.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And, you know, you're saying something, I'm because I'm doing this Futures 101 thing, I'm delving into really old futures books that I've had for years and years. And I picked up Alvin Toffler's, you know, Future Shock, 1971, you know, research from the late 60s. He says exactly that. Most people are still present-centered. Nothing has changed from that point. You know, some of his language, of course, is archaic or clunky, and you know, the field has been nuanced. But it's really interesting to see how our culture, our Western culture, is so present-centered and also sucks the energy out of imagining alternatives. So that's really interesting to me that you should say that, and it links with that bit of reading that I was doing yesterday. Now, I guess we never crack things like futures, but, you know, if someone were looking in at you and saying, "Oh, she's got everything. She's doing the Boeing stuff. You know, you've got a job, all of that sort of stuff." How do you feel about the futures stuff? Have you cracked it in any way? I know it's an ongoing thing as well, but I'm interested to see what you think about that question.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because, like you said, you know, it's this ongoing journey. I feel like I've cracked it in that I'm more comfortable using it, and obviously through the process of doing a PhD, you know, you're applying something in a largely theoretical, knowledge-centered sense, which is really important. I think since the PhD, I've been able to use some of that in a practical way, which I think is great. I think cracking it is also understanding that it's, like a facilitating role that you play, I think, when you're trying to do futures work, rather than being an expert. To be honest, it's about how you use those tools to help other people or groups come to, these conclusions, or to navigate their way through a process.
Yep. So what I'm hearing, you were saying, I'm going to gloss it with that term. I hear that what you're finding is that you're coming into your own authority within the field.
I think so. And I think that also realizing that, that you can take a futures lens to any challenge, of course, and in my view, we should. And I think if I'll say, to encourage people who are looking at doing a futures, centered PhD, you can shape that to what you see as a real knowledge gap and a real opportunity. When I was looking at these regenerative fields, it was clear that there hadn't been this real futures-centered approach to that broadly in the literature, and I think that's exciting, because it means that you get to really dive into something new. So that doesn't mean that I've cracked it by any stretch, but I have been able to apply those different tools in a specific scenario with regards to regenerative futures. But even in the aviation context, being able to bring a slightly different perspective, given my futures work, to me that's a real opportunity, and something that you can add value to in any work that you're doing. So I don't think I've cracked it, and I still look to the real futurists like yourself and others. But I think it's a really exciting community to be a part of, because there's so much learning that you can continue to do.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's also, you've almost answered my last question, which is, do you have any advice? I think you're already giving the advice.
I do.
Stuff, yeah. Can you just elaborate just a little bit more?
I think I would say, if look at how futures thinking can add to other fields, and consider that, it can add to all fields, I think. But when we look at these macro problems, sustainability and climate is one, but there are many. Modern slavery, whatever the focus that someone wanted to take, futures can be a way to deepen your academic focus in that area. It can help analyze and deconstruct an issue. It can help work towards more desirable futures. So I think it's this. Futures isn't this siloed discipline. It's something that can run vertically or thread through, lots of bits of work. Yeah. That's one thing. I think it is really cognizant on anyone about to do futures to do some of that reading of some of the foundational futures texts, to really understand some of where it's come from. Read Marcus Bussey's Future Sensors work, read Professor Sohail Inayatollah's causal layer analysis, model. Just you don't need to. It doesn't have to be War and Peace, but getting a sense of where the really key pieces of work in the field, I think, is important. But also, I think, and this will sound dairy fairy, but.
I like dairy fairy.
But when I found the futures work, and when your work particularly, Marcus, there was a feeling that it felt right in terms of what I wanted to do and how I could evolve as like a knowledge practitioner, but also as a person. And I think that trusting your gut, if this feels like a field for you, is probably as important as doing all of that other background work.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely brilliant advice, actually trusting your gut. And it was funny, I'm teaching at the uni, and I've been re-recording lectures, and one of the things I talked about was the role of the hunch. As a scholar and academic, we get a hunch about something, and it may take decades for that to unfold. And there's a very good example of that I was giving yesterday. So I think what you've said is really, really useful, Kim. Is there anything you want to say before I sign off, or we sign off?
Sorry, Marcus. Yeah, just the role of the hunch. I think embracing that through futures activity and experimentation lets you do that more in your work. this might sound quite micro, but a role of the hunch for me at the moment is we've got to finance the scale of a sustainable aviation fuel. It won't happen overnight, and it won't happen just by relying on government. So my hunch was like, I've got to get the financiers and the investments and investors in a room. We've got to paint a picture for them about what 2050 could look like, that quite frankly comes at it from their perspective as well. And you've got to we can use these tools in lots of different ways, in really practical ways. And my last piece of advice would be to allow yourself to have the freedom to shape up a PhD that feels really right for you, that obviously meets a knowledge gap. But my PhD kind of linked in a lot of ways to some of the the thinking I've had as a child, and different things I've been interested in terms of nature and the natural world over many years. So you don't have to separate the PhD scholar and the person, I think is probably the message there.
Absolutely. I think all scholarship is clandestine autobiography. To be honest, I say that to my undergraduates, and they look at me like.
That's a better way to put what I just said.
but to me, that's what it is. We can't pour 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it takes to do that PhD. You can't pour that into that without having, I guess, skin in the game again. That passion, that sense of this is something that's driving you to do it. No one's going to do it to get a job, because, to be quite honest, if you want a job as a professor, you should do something like sociology or history or chemistry or something, not the futures, because those jobs are very few and far between.
That's right. So,
wonderful. And of course, I want to just underscore that, it's you don't have to be doing a PhD to do futures. There's a lot of people who will be doing the Futures 101 who are not considering that pathway. And as Kim's made very, very clear, you can use it at any level of your life, including your own home, your own family. You can CLA your relationships. You can do futures triangles on, what are the patterns in my home? What are the pressures on us now? Oh, we've got to pay the mortgage. Where do we want to be? And so on. So I think at our life level, futures is also very relevant.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Kim, I want to thank you. We'll sign off here, and I look forward to another chat.
Thank you, Marcus.